What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So, seeing as how we just went through those Bill Colby documents on his testimony before the church committee, I figured, why not move into this family jewels stuff, which I think there's my gut instinct right off the bat is this a major obfuscation here. They're not telling the whole story. They're not telling any story. But you'll see what I mean as we get through some of this stuff. The first memorandum dated January 3rd, 1975, and the family jewels has to do with the mafia CIA stuff, which, again, like I said, my gut instinct is this is going to be mostly cover story. I don't believe for a split second they had some plan to take out Fidel Castro. Ever. We took out fucking Iraq in half a day, but we couldn't take out some fucking two-bit dictator on some dinky island 90 miles off our coast. Go fuck yourself. There's no possible way we had a fucking assassination plot against him. We would have just gone in there with fucking a jet and fucking just taken him out. Like, it's so stupid. Like, anybody who thinks we were trying to kill Castro covertly for decades is a retard. So, that's where I stand on it, and you'll never convince me otherwise, ever. Especially since, at the time, both the United States and Cuba were engaged in covert activities with Israel. So I don't want to hear fucking nothing about fucking they were trying to take out Castro. Suck my dick. Really. Fuck you. So insulting to our intelligence, isn't it? All right. Let me continue. January 3rd, 75, from James A. Wildrotter, Associate Deputy Attorney General. Subject, CIA matters. CIA Director William Colby and CIA General Counsel John Warner met with LHS and JAW Tuesday, December 31st, to discuss certain matters, including items apparently reported to the president by Colby in connection with the recent New York Times article. Colby did not show us his report to the president, but paraphrased that portion of its contents, which, in Colby and Warner's judgment, presented legal questions. Colby began the meeting by describing the management style of former CIA Director Richard Helms. According to Colby, Helms utilized a very compartmentalized organizational structure with each head of a constituent unit within the organization reporting directly to Helms. Colby described it as like spokes from a hub, with Helms as the hub, and the various compartmentalized units constituting the spokes. It was possible to be in one spoke and have no knowledge of what the other spokes were doing. Colby indicated that the various Watergate revelations touched the CIA in several ways, including Howard Hunt, the matter of psychological profiles, and the McCord letters to the CIA. Colby indicated that former CIA Director James Schlesinger sent a memorandum on May 9, 1973 to all CIA employees, directing them to report on all activities undertaken that may have fallen outside the CIA's charter. When the reports came in, Colby, by then the CIA Director, sent out the corrective memoranda. According to Colby, the reports submitted in response to Schlesinger's May 9, 1973 memorandum constitute the skeletons in the closet and form the basis of Colby's recent report to the president. Colby and Warner are trying to track down some more details about the various skeletons. The skeletons related to us by Colby are as follows. In 1964, a Russian defector was brought to the United States. Apparently, CIA thought he was a fake. The defector, a Russian citizen, was immediately confined in a house in Maryland and later in a CIA facility in Virginia for about 2 years. Apparently, he was interrogated during the 2-year physical confinement. This defector is now settled in the United States, is married, and still works voluntarily with the CIA. According to Colby, former CIA Director McCone approved this confinement. Colby stated that occasionally the CIA confines defecting individuals, but only outside the United States. Defectors are interrogated in the United States only voluntarily. According to Colby, they can walk away at any time. Colby speculated that the confinement of the Russian defector from 64 to 66 might be regarded as a violation of the kidnapping laws. Well, duh. 2. In 1963, the CIA wiretapped 2 columnists, Robert Allen and Paul Scott, following a column in a newspaper in which they disclosed certain national security information. CIA records indicate that the wiretapping was approved by McCone after discussions with then Attorney General Robert Kennedy and then Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The wiretaps, which continued from March 12th to June 15th, 1963, were described as very productive. Among those overheard calling Allen and Scott were 12 senators, 6 congressmen, and so forth. Apparently, the TAP did not disclose the source of the security information published in the Allen Scott column. From February 15th to April 12th, 72, personal surveillances were conducted by the CIA and Jack Anderson and members of his staff, Les Whitten, Britt Hume, and Mr. Spear. The physical surveillance consisted only of watching the targets and involved no breaking, entry, or wiretapping. Apparently, the physical surveillance occurred after Jack Anderson's series of tilt-forward Pakistan stories. The physical surveillances were authorized by Helms and conducted by the CIA Office of Security. The Office of Security was headed by Howard Osborne. That's got to be wrong. Howard Osborne from 1967 to 1973. Jim, let's see if we can find everything on Howard Osborne. Thank you. Between October 71 and January 72, the CIA conducted a physical surveillance of Mike Gettler, a Washington Post reporter. Again, there's no indication of wiretaps, a break-in, or an entry. Like the Anderson surveillances, the Gettler physical surveillance was apparently authorized by Helms and run by the CIA's Office of Security. In 1971, the CIA had reason to suspect a female CIA employee who was then living with a foreign Cuban national. The former CIA employee and the Cuban national apparently maintain a joint residence and a joint place of business. CIA agents broke into the business premises and unsuccessfully attempted to break into the residence to search for any documents the former CIA employee may have taken with her. The agents found nothing. The break-in apparently occurred in Fairfax, Virginia, and was conducted by the Office of Security. In July of 70, CIA agents broke into and entered an office occupied by a former defector who was still on contract to the CIA, looking for any CIA documents he may have had. The operation was conducted by the Office of Security and occurred in Silver Spring, Maryland. CIA agents apparently talked their way into the apartment of one Tofty, at the time a CIA employee, to recover CIA documents he had converted. The documents were recovered and Tofty was promptly fired. Tofty apparently sued Helms, alleging that in addition to the CIA documents, the CIA agents had also taken some of his personal correspondences. The suit was dismissed. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA's counterintelligence staff screened and in some cases opened mail to and from the Soviet Union, going through the Kennedy Airport mail depot. This operation was terminated in 1973 by Colby. While it was in existence, it was cleared by at least 3 postmasters general, and CIA records indicate that Helms discussed it with then Attorney General John Mitchell. From 1969 to October 72, the Far East Division of the CIA reviewed in San Francisco mail going to and from the People's Republic of China in an ongoing operation similar to the Soviet one at Kennedy Airport. Apparently, the CIA sought in this operation tips with respect to possible sources, contacts, etc. The CIA was apparently also interested in mail handling procedures within the PRC. Between 63 and 73, the CIA funded research in some institutions, apparently including academic institutions, on the general subject of behavioral modification. According to Colby, these activities included the participation on an unwitting basis of some U.S. citizens who were not told of the true nature of the testing. The example given by Colby was that of a pole put in the middle of a sidewalk with people's observations recorded as to which side of the pole they would walk. Apparently, some of the other testing also included reactions to certain drugs, although it is not known whether any unwitting individuals were used with respect to that type of experiment. In response to questions from LHS, Colby and Warner indicated they would provide more information on these activities, but that their own knowledge of them was very limited at this point. The CIA apparently plotted the assassination of some foreign leaders, including Castro, Lumumba, and Trujillo. The CIA had no role whatsoever in Lumumba's murder on January 17, 1961. With respect to Trujillo's assassination on May 30th of 1961, the CIA had no active part but had a faint connection with the groups that in fact did it. In connection with these matters, Warner referred to 18 U.S.C. 960 concerning expeditions against a friendly nation. Between 1967 and 1971, the CIA covertly monitored dissident groups in the Washington, D.C. area, and possibly elsewhere, who were considered to pose a threat to CIA installations. The monitoring apparently consisted of physical surveillance only. No wiretaps were involved. Some results might have been distributed to the FBI. Between May and September of 1971, the CIA conducted a physical surveillance of Latin American female and others, including a U.S. citizen, apparently in the Detroit area, who had advised the CIA of a plot to assassinate Helms and then Vice President Agnew. It is possible that a mail cover was also utilized. It is likely that the Secret Service was advised of the assassination threat with respect to the Vice President. In 1972, the CIA conducted a physical surveillance of Victor Marchetti, who wrote a book about the CIA to determine his contacts with CIA employees. Except as noted, Colby and Warner did not indicate whether any of the above items had been approved by any individuals outside of the CIA. Colby then discussed a program conducted by the CIA beginning in 1967 and aimed at identifying possible foreign links to American dissidents. This program was handled in the CIA by James Angleton and Richard Ober. Around July of 1967, Helms sent a cable from CIA headquarters referring to CIA's participation in an interagency group with respect to these matters. Apparently, the cable also refers to overseas coverage of subversive students and related activities. Apparently, a November 1967 document in the CIA's possession refers to a CIA survey of anti-war activities, including the U.S. peace movement and foreign groups. In September 1969, according to CIA documents, Helms reviewed the CIA's efforts against the international activities of radicals and black militants. Apparently, under this program, the CIA alerted people abroad to try to identify the foreign contacts of American dissidents. According to Colby, many requests in this area were originated by the FBI. Colby also indicated that the CIA had apparently placed some agents in the peace movement in the United States with the purported purpose of establishing credentials to travel abroad. A byproduct of these agents in place was information on the domestic activities of various peace organizations. Apparently, these CIA agents undertook no disruptive activities. Apparently, the CIA's files under this program contain the names of some 9,900 plus Americans. In response to a question from, can't read that, referring to New York Times stories about files on 10,000 Americans, Colby indicates that the CIA's 9,900 names is not the same as the IDIS Master Subject Index described in the December 30th, 1974 memorandum from LHS to Philip E. Arita, counsel to the president. According to Colby, approximately two-thirds of the names in the CIA's 9,900-plus list were the results of either FBI requests or reports from the CIA's foreign offices. The other one-third consist of FBI reports on Americans in the peace movement, but no other information. Colby indicated he does not know why the CIA held these latter reports since no foreign travel was involved, etc. He speculated that they were kept as a result of the tendency of bureaucrats to retain paper whether they needed it or acted on it or not. According to Colby, the Houston Plan and the subsequent establishment of the Intelligence Evaluation Committee gave stimulus to this entire effort by the CIA. Colby, after reviewing this program, considers it worthless from an intelligence standpoint. Among other things, the Soviets apparently thought the U.S. Dissidents were too unruly to be trusted with any sensitive operations. Colby also reported on three other items. One, at the CIA's request, the sheriff of San Mateo, California, polygraphed certain applicants for employment in an experiment to test effectiveness of the polygraph. 2, Colby and Warner indicated that the CIA utilizes certain systems to create alias documents, such as birth certificates. Other documents, such as credit cards, are used for what Warner described as flash purposes. That is, they are not utilized in themselves, but are used only to corroborate the operative identifying document, such as a birth certificate. For example, a false credit card or similar materials described by Warner as pocket litter will not be used to actually charge credit purchases, but rather only to corroborate a driver's license or a birth certificate. When documents of a federal agency are involved, such as Social Security card, the CIA does not manufacture or otherwise create the documents except with the knowledge of that federal agency. Warner indicated, however, that it may be a violation of some state laws to manufacture or otherwise forge state agency documents. Colby and Warner indicate that this was an ongoing operation. Colby indicated that the CIA occasionally tests experimental electronic equipment on American telephone circuits. The CIA apparently has established guidelines for these tests, which provide, among other things, that no records may be kept, no tapes, and so forth. All right. And that is the end of document number 1. Document number 2, Colby briefs President Ford on the family jewels. All right, dated January 3rd, 1975, Friday, 5:30 p.m. Memorandum of conversation. Participants: President Ford, William Colby, Director CIA, Philip W. Buchan, B-U-C-H-E-N, Counselor to the President, John O. Marsh, Jr., Counselor to the President, Lieutenant General Brent Scowcroft, Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Place: the Oval Office. Subject: allegations of CIA domestic activities. Mr. President says, I asked Phil and Jack to analyze the Colby report for me, but first, why don't you tell me where we are? Colby says, we have a couple problems, one within the agency and one with Congress. Already the 2 Armed Services Committees, the 2 Appropriations Committees, and Muskie want me to testify. I think we have a 25-year-old institution which has done some things it shouldn't have. On the dissidents, the major effort was to check if there were any foreign connections, but we held it so close there was unease within the agency. Was it really done for the foreign connections, or was it anti-dissident? We infiltrated some people so they could go overseas. That was okay, but in the course of training within the groups, they wrote on the dissidents. We passed the information to the FBI, and they passed information to us, but what happened is we would file the reports the FBI gave us. That, together with our reports from overseas, amount to about 10,000. So we can't deny that, but I will have to try to clarify it. When were the names gathered? Asked the President. Colby, beginning in 1967. It was formally terminated in March of 1974. When was the Schlesinger Directive? Colby says in May of 1973. Schlesinger was concerned when things popped up, the psychological profiles and letters from McCord about CIA and Watergate. So to find everything, he put out this directive. My report has some of it. I will cover the others now. I briefed Nedzi in July of 1973. I gave Stennis a general briefing and Symington a detailed one. He showed the President a loose-leaf notebook. What did the 3 say? Colby says, I said, here it is. We're not going to do it again. I then gave specific instructions to the department. In March 1974, we stopped the program, and I put it together with the dissident program and treated them as one. He mentions mail openings. We did have a New York and Los Angeles program in the 50s of opening first-class airmail from the USSR. For example, we have 4 to Jane Fonda. That is illegal, and we stopped it in 1973. In San Francisco, we had 1 with respect to China to find out who the contacts were. Some letters were opened. We did break into some premises to see whether there were classified documents. President Ford, were these former employees or people on the payroll? Former employees. Had they been fired? 1 had just left. He wasn't fired. Who would approve such operations? I think only the director, but possibly at these times the director of the Office of Security. My third area is the fact that we surveilled some people to find out why they had classified information. Some of the names are pretty hot. He mentioned a couple of reporters. In 1971, we surveilled Mike Getler. He had run a story which was an obvious intelligence leak. Who would have approved that? I'm pretty sure it was Helms, but whether it was directed from higher up, I don't know. In 1972, at the time of the India-Pakistan War, we put a tap on Jack Anderson and 3 of his associates. Who ordered it? Helms. Whether on his own or not, I don't know. This was not illegal, but perhaps outside our jurisdiction. We also followed some of our employees or former employees. Unfortunately, one was Marchetti. Again, it was not illegal, but it's a highly emotional area. Was this outside the agency's charter? Helms says this is a gray area. We have the responsibility to protect our sources of information. What would you have done? I said at my confirmation that I have the duty but not the authority. I would go to the FBI or somewhere like that. We have also run some wiretaps. Most of them are on our employees, but not all. Edgar Snow, for example, generally from 1965, they were approved by the Attorney General. The other was a defector, but most of them were employees. I doubt that before 63 we had Attorney General approval. These were from 51 to 65. The last tap recorded was in 71. None of these have anything to do with the Hirsch story, but he lists all these activities as being part of the anti-dissident effort. Marsh says, but Hirsch will say that out of the dissidents program came the IEC, and this is where the Gettler and Anderson tapes are very worrisome. He will say we turned to the IEC for operations when we couldn't get action from the regular agencies. Buchan says the directive was May 9th. The report was May 21st. Isn't that a bit short? Colby says most of these skeletons were around, but just in memory rather than on paper. It didn't take much to get them on paper. President Ford, who would have known of the dissident operation? Colby, the director, Kara Macinas, and the deputy director. 30 to 40 people were in the group. Who assigned Ober over there? Colby said, when we terminated the program, I nominated him. General Scowcroft described how the NSC got him and what his normal NSC duties were. Colby says, that's about it. We did collect the names of some congressmen who weren't in Congress when we got the names. He gave the president a paper on this. An X by the names means we ran a clearance for the purpose of collaboration with them. Y means the name came up in connection with a foreign country. The president then left the room. Buchan says the last directives are undated. Why? Colby says they were all issued at the same time. Marsh, they will try to get this all linked to Watergate. Do you think there's a connection? Colby, Watergate is a code word. Only that concerns about dissidents and leaks may have been hypoed by political concerns. Buchan and Marsh asked a series of questions. The president then returned. President, is counterintelligence work suffering because of the lack of coordination with the FBI? Colby says, no, we're cooperating very well. I think NSCID 9 will formally regularize the arrangements we've had with the FBI since 66. Colby, we obviously have a problem since we lost 4 of our top people. Tell me about that then, said the president. Colby, it has to be a highly compartmented activity. Angleton is an unusual type and totally dedicated to his mission. He's very intense. I thought of asking him to retire when I took over. I didn't because of the human factors. I also handled the Israeli account. On Friday before the Hirsch article appeared, I told him he could move or retire. So here we have another reference to the Israeli account. It's probably just some CIA lingo, but let's see if we can't figure out exactly what they're talking about when the CIA discusses the Israeli account in the mid-70s. Of the other 3, one had already decided to retire. His deputy, we told that he wouldn't be the chief, and he retired. The 3rd was younger, but he thought apparently he might get the job, and he retired when he didn't. Helms helped Hunt to get a job with Mullins when he retired. President, we plan to do 3 things. 1, early next week, all the intelligence chiefs will come in and I will say, you know what the law is and I expect you to obey it. 2, I'm going to appoint a blue ribbon committee to look into all this. 3, I'm going to suggest to the Hill that a joint committee is the best way for them to go to investigate. We don't want to destroy but preserve the CIA, but we want to make sure that illegal operations and those outside the charter don't happen again. Colby, we've run operations to assassinate foreign leaders. We've never succeeded. He cited Castro, Trujillo, General Schneider of Chile. I don't know what he's talking about. Trujillo got killed. General Schneider almost got killed. Did they kill him? I don't remember if they killed Schneider or not, but I know there was an attempt. There's another skeleton, a defector we suspected of being a double agent. We kept confined for 3 years. There's one other very messy problem. After the ITT Chile congressional investigation, there was an allegation that our testimony was not all kosher. I don't think there was any criminal action, but there was some skating on thin ice. There's an old rule that to protect sources and information, you could stretch things. But the White House hasn't been told about my book of skeletons. That is where that one ends. Weird how it ends like right in the middle. All right. Next document is Kissinger's reaction to all this. I don't know why they had to have a separate document on Kissinger. That guy must have been some kind of fucking grand wizard of the fucking Illuminati Satan Club. All right, White House. Memorandum of Conversation, January 4th, 75. This appears to be the day before that last memo. Participants, President Gerald Ford, Dr. Henry Kissinger, Lieutenant General Brent Scowcroft, Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs in the Oval Office. Kissinger, what is happening is worse than in the days of McCarthy. You will end up with a CIA that does only reporting and not operations. He has turned over to the FBI the whole of his operation. He has offered to resign, and I refused. It is not my prerogative, but I said not until you are proved guilty of criminal conduct. The president says, I agree. Kissinger Helms said all these stories are just the tip of the iceberg. If they come out, blood will flow. For example, Robert Kennedy personally managed the operation on the assassination of Castro. He described some of the other stories. I told him Buchan would warn him, and he won't say anything incriminating. The president, I know Dick Helms and think very highly of him. Kissinger, the Chilean thing, that's not in any report. That's sort of a blackmail on me. The president, what can we do? We can get Griswold, Lemnitzer, Friendly, Reagan, Jack Connor, Shannon, Dillon. Kissinger, you might think of Rusk. This will get very rough, and you need people around you who know the presidency, the national interest. What Colby has done is a disgrace. The president, should we suspend him? Kissinger, no, but after the investigation is over, you could move him and put him in put in someone of towering integrity. When the FBI has a hunting license into the CIA, this could end up worse for the country than Watergate. The president, would Rusk have known any of this stuff? Kissinger, why don't you ask him? They discussed the Moore spying incident and what he did to protect the institutions of the JCS. Rumsfeld enters to talk about Rusk. Kissinger discusses some of the legislative restrictions. The president talks to Rusk, tries to call Dave Packard. Buchan and Marsh come in. Then the blue ribbon announcement is reviewed. And that's where that one ends. Document 4. All right, so these documents are the 4 documents that are surrounding the larger 600-plus page document that we're going to start on, today. We'll start on that today. So, but these are very, very important because it goes to show that there was kind of a breakdown in the CIA and kind of an alter ego of a CIA between the 60s and the 70s when they had to kind of get their shit together and they were kind of kneecapped a little, right? And this is when George Bush, at some time, by 78, 79, George Bush will start the Safari Club to get around all of the restrictions put on the CIA. And then when he becomes president, he gets rid of all that stuff. And the CIA can run wild once again. We are literally run by fucking criminals. All right, so memorandum of conversation participants: Kissinger, Schlesinger, Colby, Arita, Silberman, Hoffman, Scowcroft. February 20th, 75, in Kissinger's office at the White House. Secretary Kissinger, shouldn't we discuss what we are trying to achieve in these investigations and what we are trying to prevent? The fact that these investigations could be as damaging to the intelligence community as McCarthy was to Foreign Service. The nature of covert operations will have a curious aspect to the average mind, and out of perspective, it could look inexplicable. The result could be the drying up of the imaginations of the people on which we depend. If people think they will be indicted 10 years later for what they do, that is my overwhelming concern. And I say I don't know what the abuses are. Schlesinger, legally, NSA is spotless. Kissinger, if they are only looking at illegal activities. Silberman, there aren't enough illegal activities for them to chew on. Colby, the issue will be, do we do these things? Mr. Arita, Church says he's going to look into the legal, moral, and political cost-effectiveness aspects of it. Kissinger, then we're in trouble. The committees and staff don't inspire confidence. Harrington and Miller are professional leakers. Miller is also violently anti-Vietnam, and he believes the way to get the government is to leak it to death. Colby, my idea is to control this to get secretary agreements that keeps them from publishing. Kissinger, in their own names, you can't keep them from Cy Hirsch. Colby, our testimony will have numbers in place of names. We will divide them into 3 categories in increasing order of sensitivity. Kissinger, who gets the lists? Colby, the chairman. It is under their control. If he insists on a name in category 3, we then move carefully. We either tell him refuse on my own initiative or bucket to the White House. Kissinger, you can initially take a position on professional judgment, but then we must go to the president. Bill should invoke himself first so as to not invoke the president initially in each case. We must say this involves the profoundest national security. Of course, we want to cooperate, but these are basic issues of national survival. Mr. Arita, should the president meet with Tower and Church to make these appointments? Kissinger, in all the world, the things which hurt us the most are the CIA business and Turkey aid. The British can't understand us. Callahan says insiders there are routinely tapped. Our statements ought to indicate the gravity with which we view the situation. Why can't Bill testify? Colby says names, countries of operations. Kissinger, you can't even do it by country X, and Church wants to prove you shouldn't do it at all. Colby, I would do it in an executive session. If it leaks, then we have a good case. Silberman, I agree. Our position on executive privilege would be better if we had a leak first. Kissinger, what if Miller waited until after the investigation to go to Hirsch? Silberman, it won't hold that long. We first give them less sensitive information, so if it leaks, we aren't hurt so much. Kissinger, suppose you say on covert operations that we support the moderate political parties. On a global basis, that is okay, but how does that serve Church's purpose? He will then just prove not only is it immoral, but useless. We have to demonstrate to foreign countries we aren't too dangerous to cooperate because of leaks. Mr. Arita, is there any mileage in having the leaders of the select committee have a meeting with the president? Mr. Silberman, it is premature. They could only discuss generalities because we couldn't know the line yet. We should keep the president out of it until we get into crunch. Kissinger says, I agree. Silberman, the FBI may be the sexiest part of this. Hoover did things which won't stand scrutiny, especially under Johnson. We will put these out in generic terms as quickly as possible. The Bureau would like to dribble it out. This will divert attention and show relative cooperation with the committee. This relates only to illegal activities. Kissinger relates story about Hoover and the female spy. Kissinger, we have to be clear on what we want them to stay out of. Colby, I will refuse to give them the files on people on privacy grounds. Arita, that is a good case for a confrontation. Hoffman, but don't we have to preserve their ability to keep security? Kissinger, Harrington is a leaker. Any House member has access to the material we turn over. We can't fight on details, only categories. We have to know the rules about NSA, covert operations, and any other areas. Arita, there is a constitutional problem on covert operations. We can't take the posture that we can engage in operations that were kept from the committees, which Congress has designated as responsible for oversight. Kissinger, first we must define the issues, then we could go to court. Silberman, I doubt it would go to court. It would take 2 years. Kissinger, then we could go to the public that they are undermining the country. Colby, but we're doing so little in covert activities. It is not too damaging. Kissinger, then disclosing them will show us to the world as a cream puff. There are dozens of places where we are letting the situation go by default. Let's establish categories of especially sensitive activities. Then whoever testifies will follow these guidelines. Colby, the dangerous thing on NSA is whether they can pick up conversations between Americans. Kissinger, my worry is not that they will find illegalities in NSA, but that in the process of finding out about illegalities, they will unravel NSA activities. In the process of giving us a clean bill of health, he could destroy us. Do we have a case on executive privilege? Silberman, in the case of U.S. v. Nixon, there is something there, but you can't analyze it on a strictly legal basis. Kissinger, I think this group should establish categories of what we say methods for protecting what we need to keep. Then we can sit down with the president to understand what the issue is. Then we would avoid the danger to get that through each week. We would jeopardize the next week's hearings. So it appears there's a little bit of panic and scrambling going on behind the scenes. In regards to their covert actions and the illegal shit that they were all doing. It looks like I might have a fifth part here. Hang on just one second. Is this it? No. Okay, so on that note, we shall start with the larger scale documents surrounding the family jewels. All right. When we go through these big documents like this, what we find is that there is a ton of like administrative bullshit, cover sheets and stuff like that. So when we get to cover sheets, I'm just going to skip over them. This one here has a date of 1973, May 16th, from Howard J. Osborne, Director of Security. Looks like a CIA internal document. May 16, 73, memorandum for Executive Secretary, CIA Management Committee, subject family jewels. 1. The purpose of this memorandum is to forward for your personal review summaries of activities conducted either by or under the sponsorship of the Office of Security in the past, which, in my opinion, conflict with the provisions of the National Security Act of 1947. 2. These activities cover the period from March 59 to date and represent as accurate a record as is available in our files. Those activities, which took place prior to the date of my appointment as Director of Security on July 1st, 64, have been developed to a certain extent through the recollection of the senior people in this office who were involved or who had knowledge of the activities at the time that had occurred. 3. I've gone back to March 1959 because I believe that the activities occurring since that time still have a viable flap potential, in that many of the people involved, both agency and non-agency, are still alive, and through their knowledge of the activity, represent a possible potential threat or embarrassment to the agency. I would be glad to provide clarification or an explanation of any of these activities if desired. You have my assurance that, unless otherwise stated, each of these activities was approved by the higher authority, the Director of CIA, the Deputy Director of CIA, the Executive Director Comptroller, or the Deputy Director of Support. Signed, Howard J. Osborne, Director of Security. All right. So now we get to a list of names involved in some of the initial family jewels stuff. Attachment A. 1 is completely redacted. We don't have no fucking idea what that one is. 2 is Johnny Roselli. Says the use of a member of the mafia in an attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro. 3. Project Mockingbird. During the period from 12 March 63 to 15 June 63, this office installed telephone taps on 2 Washington-based newsmen who were suspected of disclosing classified information obtained from a variety of governmental and congressional sources. That's the official cover story for Mockingbird, if you didn't know that one. Yuri Ivanovich Nosenko, a KGB defector who, from the period of 13 August 65 to 27 October 67, was confined in a specially constructed jail at Redacted. He was literally confined in a cell behind bars with nothing but a cot in it for this period. 5 various surveillance and support activities. These are briefly summarized and range from the surveillance of newsmen to the provision of specialized support of local police officials in the metropolitan area. I believe that each one is self-explanatory, and therefore no further comment is needed here. Equipment support to local police attached is a list provided me by the Director of Logistics. He will simply report these items in his report, which we have provided local police in the metropolitan D.C. area over the past 4 or 5 years on indefinite loan. During the period when the agency's installations in this area appeared to be a target of dissident elements, a conscious decision was made by the agency to utilize the services of local police to repel invaders in case of riot or dissension, as opposed to utilization of our GSA guards who are not trained in this type of activity. This equipment has been issued over the years to local police, principally Fairfax and Arlington County Police Departments. I do not believe that this is totally illegal under the provisions of the National Security Act of 1947, but I am including it since I am sure that it would be considered as such in light of the recent congressional fuss over our police training activities. 7. Audio countermeasures support to the United States Secret Service. 8. Test of specialized equipment in Miami immediately prior to the political convention there. A bunch of blank pages. A bunch of fucking fully redacted pages. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, then a blank page, and then here we go. So we got a bunch of redacted stuff. All right, subject, Johnny Roselli. 1. In August of 1960, Mr. Richard Bissell approached Colonel Sheffield Edwards to determine if the Office of Security had assets that may assist in a sensitive mission requiring gangster-type action. The mission target was Fidel Castro. 2. Because of its extreme sensitivity, only a small group was made privy to the project. The DCI was briefed and gave his approval. Colonel J.C. King, Chief, White House Division, was briefed, but all details were deliberately concealed from any of the JM Wave officials. Certain TSD and communications personnel participated in the initial planning stages, but were not witting of the purpose of the mission. 3. Robert Mayu, a cleared source of the Office of Security, was contacted, briefed generally on the project, and requested to ascertain if he could develop an entree into the gangster elements as the first step towards accomplishing the desired goal. 4. Mr. Mayu advised that he had met one Johnny Roselli on several occasions while visiting Las Vegas. He only knew him casually through clients, but was given to understand that he was a high-ranking member of the syndicate and controlled all of the ice-making machines on the Strip. Mayu reasoned that if Roselli was in fact a member of the clan, he undoubtedly had connections leading into the Cuban gambling interests. 5. Mayu was asked to approach Roselli, who knew Mayu as a personal relations executive handling domestic and foreign accounts, and tell him that he had recently been retained by a client who represented several international business firms which were suffering heavy financial losses in Cuba as a result of Castro's action. They were convinced that Castro's removal was the answer to their problem, and were willing to pay a price of $150,000 for its successful accomplishment. It was to be made clear to Roselli that the United States government was not and should not become aware of this operation. 6. The pitch was made to Roselli on 14 September 1960 at the Hilton Plaza Hotel in New York City. Mr. James O'Connell, Office of Security, was present during this meeting and was identified to Roselli as an employee of Mayu. O'Connell actively served as Roselli's contact until May of '62, at which time he phased out due to an overseas assignment. His initial reaction was to avoid getting involved, but through Mayu's persuasion, he agreed to introduce him to a friend, Sam Gold, who knew the Cuban crowd. Roselli made it clear he did not want any money for his part and believed Sam would feel the same way. Neither of these individuals were ever paid out of agency funds. Sam Gold, I feel, is an alias. 7. During the week of September 25th, Mayu was introduced to Sam, who was staying at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. It was several weeks after his meeting with Sam and Joe, who was identified to him as a courier between Havana and Miami, that he saw photographs of both these individuals in the Sunday supplemental parade. They were identified as Momo Salvatore Giancana and Santos Traficante, respectively. I told you. Both men were on the list of Attorney General's 10 most wanted men. The former was described as the Chicago chieftain of the Cosa Nostra and successor to Al Capone, and the latter, the Cosa Nostra boss of Cuban operations. Mayu called this office immediately upon ascertaining this information. 8. In discussing the possible methods of accomplishing this mission, Sam suggested that they not resort to firearms, but if he could be furnished some type of potent pill that could be placed in Castro's food or drink, it would be a much more effective operation. Sam indicated that he had a prospective nominee in the person of Juan Orta, a Cuban official who'd been receiving kickback payments from the gambling interests who still had access to Castro and was in a financial bind. 9. TSD was requested to produce 6 pills. That's a technical services division. Was requested to produce 6 pills of high lethal content. 10. Joe delivered the pills to Orta. After several weeks of reported attempts, Orta apparently got cold feet and asked out of the assignment. He suggested another candidate who made several attempts without success. 11. Joe then indicated that Dr. Anthony Verona, one of the principal officers in the Cuban exile junta, had become disaffected with the apparent ineffectual progress of the junta and was willing to handle the mission through his own resources. 12. He asked as a prerequisite to the deal that he be given $10,000 for organizational expenses and requested $1,000 worth of communications equipment. 13. Dr. Verona's potential was never fully exploited as the project was canceled shortly after the Bay of Pigs episode. Verona was advised that the offer was withdrawn and the pills were retrieved. 14. Of significant interest was an incident which involved a request levied by Sam upon Mayu. At the height of the project negotiations, Sam expressed concern about his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire, who had learned he was getting much attention from Dan Rowan while both were booked at the Las Vegas nightclub. Sam asked Mayu to put a bug in Rowan's room to determine the extent of his intimacy with Miss McGuire. The technician involved in the assignment was discovered in the process, arrested, and taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. He called Mayu and informed him that he had been detained by the police. This call was made in the presence of sheriff's personnel. Subsequently, the Department of Justice announced its intention to prosecute Mayu, along with the technician. On 7th of February, 1962, the Director of Security briefed the Attorney General Robert Kennedy on the circumstances leading up to Mayu's involvement in the wiretap. At our request, prosecution was dropped. 15. In May of 1962, Mr. William Harvey took over as case officer, and it is not known by this office whether Roselli was used operationally from that point on. 16. It was subsequently learned from the FBI that Roselli had been convicted on 6 counts involving illegal entry into the United States. Our records do not reflect the date of conviction, but it is believed to have been sometime during November 1967. 17. On 2 December 1968, Roselli, along with 4 other individuals, was convicted of conspiracy to cheat members of the Friars Club of $400,000 in a rigged gin rummy game. 18. Mr. Harvey reported to the Office of Security of his contacts with Roselli during November and December 67 and January 68. It was his belief that Johnny would not seek out the agency for assistance in the deportation proceedings unless he actually faced deportation. Roselli expressed confidence that he would win an appeal. 19. On 17 November 1970, Mayu called James O'Connell, Roselli's first case officer, to advise that Mayu's attorney, Ed Morgan, had received a call from Thomas Wadden, W-A-D-D-I-N, Roselli's lawyer, who stated that all avenues of appeal had been exhausted and his client now faces deportation. Wadden indicated that if someone did not intercede on Roselli's behalf, he would make a complete expose of his activities with the agency. 20. On 18 November 1970, Mr. Helms was briefed on the latest development in this case, and it was decided that the agency would not in any way assist Roselli. Mayu was so advised of the agency's position, and he was in complete agreement with our stand. He further advised that he was not concerned about any publicity as it affected him personally, should Roselli decide to tell all. 21. Subsequently, Roselli or someone on his behalf furnished Jack Anderson details of the operation. Attached are 2 Anderson columns detailing this matter. 22. The last known residence of Roselli was the federal penitentiary in Seattle, Washington. All right, followed by another blank page. And then we have the article on Roselli. Something, I think I'll go ahead and I'll read it, and then we'll call it here for today. Okay. All right. The Washington merry-go-round. Washington Post, Monday, January 13th, 1971. 6 attempts to kill Castro laid to CIA by Jack Anderson. Locked in the darkest recesses of the Central Intelligence Agency is the story of 6 assassination attempts against Cuba's Fidel Castro. For 10 years, only a few key people have known the terrible secret. They have sworn never to talk, yet we've learned the details from sources whose credentials are beyond question. We spoke to John McCone, who headed the CIA at the time of the assassination attempts. He acknowledged the idea had been discussed inside the CIA, but he insisted it had been rejected immediately. He vigorously denied that the CIA ever participated in any plot on Castro's life. Asked whether the attempts could have been made with his knowledge, he replied it could not have happened. We have complete confidence, however, in our sources. The plot to knock off Castro began as part of the Bay of Pigs operation. The intent was to eliminate the Cuban director before the motley invaders landed on the island. Their arrival was expected to touch off a general uprising, which the communist militia would have had more trouble putting down without the charismatic Castro to lead them. After the first attempt failed, 5 more assassination teams were sent to Cuba. The last team reportedly made it to a rooftop within shooting distance of Castro before they were apprehended. This happened around the last February or 1st of March 1963. 9 months later, President Kennedy was gunned down in Dallas by Lee Harvey Oswald, a fanatic who previously had agitated for Castro in New Orleans and had made a mysterious trip to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. Among those privy to the CIA conspiracy, there is still a nagging suspicion, unsupported by the Warren Commission's findings, that Castro became aware of the U.S. plot upon his life and somehow recruited Oswald into the plot against President Kennedy. To set up the Castro assassination, the CIA enlisted Robert Mayu, a former FBI agent with shadowy contacts who had handled other undercover assignments for the CIA out of Washington's Public Relations Office. He later moved to Las Vegas to head up billionaire Howard Hughes' Nevada operations. Mayu recruited John Roselli, a ruggedly handsome gambler with contacts in both the American and Cuban underworlds, to arrange assassination. The dapper, hawk-faced Roselli, formerly married to movie actress June Lang, was a power in the movie industry until his conviction with racketeer Willie Bischoff in a $1 million Hollywood labor shakedown. The CIA assigned 2 of its most trusted operatives, William Harvey and James Big Jim O'Connell, to the hush-hush murder mission. Using phony names, they accompanied Roselli on trips to Miami to line up the assassination teams. The full story reads like the script of a James Bond movie, complete with secret trysts at glittering Miami Beach hotels and midnight powerboat dashes to secret landing spots on the Cuban coast. Once Roselli's boat was shot out from under him. God, I'm so glad people don't write like this anymore today. For the first try, the CIA furnished Roselli with a special poison capsule to slip into Castro's food. The poison was supposed to take 3 days to kill him. By the time Castro died, the system would throw off all traces of the poison, so he would appear to be the victim of a natural cause, if mysterious ailment. Roselli arranged with a Cuban related to one of Castro's chefs to plant the deadly pellet in the dictator's food. On March 13, 1961, Roselli delivered capsules to his contact at Miami Beach glamorous Fontainebleau Hotel. A couple of weeks later, just about the right time for the plot to have been carried out, the report out of Havana said Castro was ill, but he recovered before the Bay of Pigs invasion, April 17, 1961. 4 more attempts were made on Castro's life. All right. Let me continue. This is actually another article, but the first one cuts off there. And how much? Yeah, this one's only 1 page. I'll read this one too. Castro stalker worked for the CIA by Jack Anderson. The mystery man, whom the Central Intelligence Agency recruited to assassinate Cuba's Fidel Castro, has been laid up in the sick ward of Los Angeles County Jail. He's handsome, hawk-faced John Roselli, once a dashing figure around Hollywood and Las Vegas, now a gray 66-year-old inmate with a respiratory ailment. Confidential FBI files identify him as a top mafia figure who watched over the concealed interests in Las Vegas casinos of the Chicago underworld. Roselli's admitted to friends that he was a rum runner during the Roaring Twenties. operating, I can't read that, something the East Coast, operating along the East Coast. He learned how to evade Coast Guard cutters and police patrols. His name later became linked with the biggest names in the Chicago and Los Angeles underworlds. He also developed contacts in the Cuban underworld before Castro took over the Havana gambling casinos. He had the right background for a hush-hush mission that the CIA was planning in '61 as part of the Bay of Pigs invasion. The CIA happened to something of Castro and something. God, the rest of this is getting kind of hard to read. Risk's neck. Roselli was recruited for the job by Robert Mayu, a former FBI agent who admitted to us that he had handled undercover assignments for the CIA. He refused, however, to discuss the details. This is the name Mayhew, incidentally, who is now involved in a legal battle over phantom billionaire Howard Hughes' Nevada operations. Roselli was so flattered over being asked to perform a secret mission for the U.S. government that he paid all his expenses out of his own pocket and risked his neck to land the assassination teams on the Cuban coast. In James Bond fashion, he held whispered meetings in Miami Beach hotels with Cubans willing to make an attempt at Castro's life. Once he called on Chicago racket boss Sam Giancana to line up a contact. The confidential files report that Giancana had gambling interests in and interest in the shrimp business in Cuba. However, the Chicago gangster took no direct part in the assassination plot. Roselli made midnight dashes to Cuba with his hired assassins in twin powerboats. Once a Cuban patrol ship turned its guns on his darkened boat, tore a hole in the bottom and sank the boat, Roselli was fished out of the water by the other boat, which escaped into the shadows. In earlier columns, we reported how the CIA furnished Roselli with deadly poison capsules, which he, something through a relative of Castro's chef, to plant in the dictator's food. Later, marksmen armed with high-powered Belgian rifles attempted to infiltrate close enough to gun Castro down. All told, 6 assassination attempts were made. The last in the spring of '63. Throughout this period, Roselli worked under the direct supervision of 2 CIA agents, William Harvey and Big James O'Connell. Roselli's reward: the FBI got wind of the assassination plot, has tried to pump Roselli for information, but he was sworn to silence by the CIA, and up to this moment, he hasn't broken it. Meanwhile, the Justice Department, as part of its crackdown on organized crime, tried to nail Roselli. The FBI discovered that his Chicago birth records had been forged, that his name was really Filippo Sacco, and that he had come to this country from Italy as a child. He was convicted for failing to register as an alien. He was also convicted for conspiracy to rig card games at a Los Angeles executive friars club. Of Roselli's own CIA associates, Harvey is now retired to Indianapolis, and O'Connell is still on the CIA payroll. Can't read that. Something when Roselli, but rumored to discuss their CIA activities. Harvey said that he had a high regard for Roselli and called the Friars Club case a bum rap. Said Harvey, the Friars Club indictment is phony. Roselli had no more to do with it than I had. Roselli's lawyers are now trying to get clemency for their client, citing our stories about his secret CIA service. Firearms fiasco. Under pressure from the firearms lobby, the Treasury Department has failed to enforce a vital section of the 1958 Federal Firearms Act. The law was passed after the murders of Senator Robert Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King. It authorizes Treasury Secretary to require full reports on all firearms and ammunition sales. For the 2 years that the law has been enforced, the Treasury Department has ignored this key provision. The gun industry has complained it would be a bookkeeping nightmare. The federal government, which would have to comply with sales data, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what that's got to do with this, but it's all tacked under this same article. But that appears to end that there. And it looks like we will pick up tomorrow on the next section, which looks like to be Project Mockingbird. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I will see you all then.